Gupton mentioned Starbucks. It always reminds me of a place I show tourists every time we go to Bethlehem, because on the walk up to the Church of the Nativity, there's an Arab coffee shop called Stars and Bucks. And it uses almost the same logo. And I'm sure Starbucks would probably prefer them to do something different, but everybody takes as many pictures of that as they do the Church of the Nativity. Stars and Bucks. In Isaiah 26, I'm going to read verse 3. We have a reference to peace. Previous two chapters, the prophet is visioning the frustration God has with his people, which is nothing new. And in this case, God is concerned about these global matters and the problems of the world. And the Judeans are concerned about their petty little issues with Moab. And it's really frustrating God. But then they get to the point where the vision kind of shifts in chapter 26. And now you have this vision of the Judeans going up to Jerusalem, place of worship, presence of God. It says, we have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and bulwarks. Open the gates that the righteous nation that keeps faith may enter in. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever. And then in verse 12, O Lord, will you ordain peace for us? There is this promise, in a sense, that if you really trust in the Lord, you will understand and experience perfect peace. In August of about 1875, an Anglican bishop was on vacation, and I think you'll see why. It probably was more than a vacation at the time. But he went to the church of a friend of his who was also, in fact, he was a canon at that Anglican church. And he preached from Isaiah 26 and verse 3. And it impressed this man that he exposed or explained the Hebrew behind it. Because in this text, it has peace twice. Peace, peace. The Septuagint dropped one of them and put perfect peace, because in Hebrew, when you have something doubled, it means it's really, really important, or it's complete or full or whatever. But he liked that. He just sort of got his attention, that double peace, that shalom, shalom, perfect peace. That afternoon, he went to visit a friend who was a relative who also had been a minister, but he was dying. And by the time he got there, he was really not very coherent. But he sat down with him, they were alone, and he told about this text from Isaiah 26. And then in their quiet time, since he was not able to respond much, he pulled out a sheet of paper and he wrote a poem. And using this shalom, shalom, and the translation in English, perfect peace, he called it peace, perfect peace. So when he wrote this and put it on a card, and for the rest of his ministry for more than 30 years, every time someone was confirmed in the church, he always gave them that poem on this card. So it became pretty famous in England. In fact, it was Queen Victoria's favorite song. One time he took a trip to China and Japan, and he was really impressed that they were actually singing that song. It had been interpreted and translated into Japanese and Chinese. Peace, perfect peace. I'm going to look at that song here in just a moment. But if you look at the life behind that, the time that he wrote it was an interesting kind of a boundary event in his life. He had married his cousin Rosa, and they'd been married 25 years, had 6 boys and 10 girls. And 2 years before he had this experience, his wife died, and he'd already lost 1 son and 2 daughters. So he'd had some very significant death and loss in his family and his life. And I'm assuming that his time for vacation was probably a time to grieve or just to process things. He was near a friend who was another minister. I'm just kind of reading between the lines. And it's going to be, I think, reflected as we look at this, take another look at his poem. A year later, he marries another cousin named Ellen, and they lived together 30 years, didn't have any other kids. But it seems like the year after this, he kind of gets back on track again and gets going. So it's very possible that this song comes at a rather critical time in his life. Before I look at this song, I want to put the pause button and go to kind of real church situations as we look at our own personal peace in churches. Stats are 2 out of every 5 churches will have a major crisis every 5 years. Now, I know of some that are locked into permanent crisis mode. And it seems like they go from one to the next about every year and can't seem to break the cycle, and they just stay in a crisis management mode. And if you're ministering in those churches, it's as trying as losing a wife and 3 kids. You'll lose every bit as much sleep. You'll agonize. You'll have self-doubt. You'll even come up with, as you listen to this dark voice on your shoulder here saying, ministry's not for you. You wasted all that time in grad school. You must have just not been thinking clearly when you thought you would go into ministry. Or as some of us conclude, I think the reason this place isn't packed is a lot of people don't want to go into ministry because of the conflict, because of the trials and the challenges, because you know they're there. They seem to be pretty obvious if you've been in a church any length of time. I would encourage you, I think we all would, rather than avoid the conflict, just prepare yourself for it. Just equip yourself for it. When we think of some of the most difficult challenges like heart surgery, before I have someone do surgery on me, I hope they went through a lot of trying times in clinicals and everything else long before they opened up my chest. And they prepared themselves to save my life. And I hope that you will see God equipping you, that any trial and frustration and temptation and the moment you want to give up and quit comes your way. Don't quit. Just raise the bar. Find ways that God can help you strengthen your own will to be faithful to the calling He's giving you. And do it, and here's the kicker, as a non-anxious presence. Because that's going to create tremendous amount of anxiety. I can absolutely guarantee it. And yet good leadership comes out of a non-anxious presence. Peter Stenke describes this non-anxious presence as, you keep calm for the purpose of reflection and conversation. When you become anxious, can anybody talk to you? And when we become anxious, we probably better not talk to people because it doesn't come out like we want to. We're definitely going to say things we shouldn't say. There's been a number of times I've had one of our grads here call me on a Saturday night, totally anxious, totally, just at his wit's end, about ready to unload next Sunday morning, and it's clear who he's going to be talking about. And I try to convince him, you don't want to do that. You'll be fired by Sunday afternoon. And he speaks out of his anxiety. Non-anxious presence tolerates high degree of uncertainty, frustration, and pain. Ministry has minimal certainty in it on the short term. It has a lot of certainty in it on the long term. It's seldom painless, and it's certainly, at least my experience has been, it's never without frustration. I would love to work in church. I love working in church. It's the people that really bother me. They disappoint. They don't meet my expectations. And a lot of times, I don't even meet my expectations. So it's frustrating all the way around. And if you put yourself in a whole other cultural environment, then you've got cultural adaptation, culture shock, and a whole lot of other things that adds to the frustration. non-anxious presence. And then a non-anxious presence can maintain a clear sense of direction. What happens is when we become anxious, fears and anxiety mess up our thinking, and we get so short-term, we do things that can even destroy our long-term effectiveness. And we lose our sense of direction and purpose. It's somewhat like Elijah, after he'd had this successful event on Mount Carmel, gets down there and now becomes anxious all over again, and God has to say, Elijah, what are you doing here? Are you losing your direction, your purpose? Get up and go. Keep doing what I've called you to do. You have no idea how many people have not bowed to Baal. Get up and keep going. Anxiety shuts us down. If Satan can't get you with sexual temptations and financial irresponsibility, he'll get you with anxiety. He will get you. And that one's a little bit easier to pass. So turn to the song. Let me just reflect on the phrases. In fact, this edition in our song book only has half of the verses that were actually written. And it's eliminated. A typical American, you've heard it said that death is un-American. The dark verses it eliminated and only gave us kind of the good stuff. And I really think we need to look at the dark stuff too, the reality. That was the context that the poem was actually written in a room with the dying friend. And he has these reflections about death that he has experienced in his own personal family, now with a close friend. And those are the verses that we've eliminated when we look at this. The other thing that he did is the context of Isaiah 26 was antiphonal. And if you'll notice, that's what he's done in the poem too. It's antiphonal. And any hymn book you read it in that leaves out the question marks has edited what was originally done. The first phrase is always a question mark. Peace, perfect peace in this dark world of sin? Question mark. So each one of those first three stanzas in this case should have a question mark behind them, and then what follows is the answer. And then the last one is sort of an affirmation of, that's enough. That is enough. I am not going to let this junk get the best of me, and I'm going to be faithful to God, is basically what he's saying in that last verse. Peace, perfect peace in this dark world of sin. Now, you may think he's talking about all the sin around us and the sin of everybody he knows in church that he's counseled over the last 3 months. I would like to think he may be thinking about his own. I'd at least encourage you to do that. We all have a dark side. It could be paranoia, codependency, passive-aggressive, compulsive. We all have dark sides. And the dark side is what comes up in these times of anxiety. And the more stress and more anxiety you have, that's when it will be absolutely frustrating, because your dark side is going to be obvious. You may have hidden it, you can cover it up, you can deny it, but at some point it will slap you in the face. His response to it was, the blood of Jesus whispers peace within. At some point, the peaceable kingdom now integrates itself in my own personal existence, and I realize the blood of Christ even covers my dark side. And if I can reduce my anxiety toward my own humanity, and it's just hard to believe, we're humans. We would like to be angels and never have to face death, and never have to face the problems and temptations of living in the flesh, but we're not. And here he's writing, facing his own mortality with a friend, identifying with a friend, probably looking at his own life, at however many years God gives him. He wants peace. He wants this perfect, this shalom, so that he can overcome his own weaknesses. Second one, peace, perfect peace by thronging duties pressed? Question mark. Oh yeah. Do any of you have more work to do than you need? Would you like a little bit less assignments and a little bit less reading and a little more free time and Who doesn't? Add to it 16 kids. And a responsibility for a church, and on it goes. I can't imagine the duties that were pressed on him on a daily basis. I can't imagine. His response was, to do the will of Jesus, this is rest. Which assumes you have a sense of your calling. If you know and you're aware of the gifts God has given you, and now you have this opportunity, it will not be perfect. It will be a mess. God has put you with your gifts into this chaotic mess of a church, of a context, a place in the world, whatever it is. Even in Venezuela right now is a chaotic mess that needs people who are at peace with themselves to bring peace, that at least when they're in church, there's peace. They're part of the peaceable kingdom, that the world around them is in a mess. But it also comes by those who lead. That peaceable kingdom shapes our own hearts and reduces our anxiety when we're dealing with all these duties that we're to do. What may come to your mind is the day that Jesus was healing people in Capernaum, and then he stopped and went off and prayed. Had I been Peter, I'd have gone, whoa, I mean, that kid's going to die if you don't do something tonight. Or what's going to happen to that lady over there? And you know, it's like, and you see this throng of, there's still people waiting in the lobby to be healed, and he walks off and goes and prays. Thronging duties round, and yet Jesus kept some priorities. What do you think he was trying to teach his disciples? Even though they had the gift of healing, they were not to be, that was actually secondary to some of the other things they were to do, because you'll never end up healing everybody on earth. That'll never happen. We'll do all we can, but to just recognize there's something that's going to keep tugging at you, that's a passion of yours, a burden of yours, and it's going to so drive you, it can eat you alive. So he says, let's just do the will of God. We're not the whole church. We don't have the whole job. It's our Father's world. I just need to be content with what God's will is in my life to serve here in this place and in this way at this time. And I can find peace. Peace, perfect peace, with sorrow surging round. Oh yeah. The day he's writing it, reflecting on what's happened in the last couple of years in his life, he had a lot of sorrow in his life. But his response was, on Jesus' bosom not, but calm is found. I think more contemporary English would be, a hug from Jesus is all you need. And where's that going to come from? From a brother and sister in Christ. As you're suffering the pain of loss and the sorrow all around, there's something just about a hug that reminds you it's okay and it's going to be okay. And so you can think of songs like In the Arms of Jesus or other songs like that. Now, what is not here is, mid suffering's sharpest throes, how can there be peace, perfect peace, with all this suffering? The sympathy of Jesus breathes repose. Jesus experienced sorrows. He was a man of sorrows. And he can breathe repose. He can bring relief. Another verse. Peace, perfect peace with loved ones so far away. And he can probably name all of his, 13 kids he still had back home somewhere. Somebody was taking care of these kids while he was gone. This was long before cell phones and find a friend, so where you know where all your kids are. He didn't know where they were. With loved ones so far away, he just says, in Jesus' keeping we are safe, and they. Peace, perfect peace, our future all unknown. Jesus knows, and he's on the throne. And then death shadowing us and ours. Jesus has vanquished death and all its powers. And then he says, it's enough. Earth's struggles soon shall cease. There's no question mark here. Now it's the declaration. It's the conclusion of all this series of questions and answers. And Jesus calls us to heaven's perfect peace. He is the King of the peaceable kingdom.